Coming up, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast will be on. We'll be looking at the Jean-Claude Van Damme film Replicant. The next week, Rich Haas from DTV Digest will be on. We'll be looking at two from Gary Daniels. We'll be looking at Rage and Recoil, so a couple of the PM classics of Daniels's. And then in 2 weeks, Ty from Comeuppance will be back on. We'll be looking at Operation Black Ops and Hollow Point. As far as the site goes, not sure this week. Looking to do either Codename Vengeance, Shannon Tweed, or Phoenix. I might do Phoenix just because I may not get a chance to rewatch Codename Vengeance. I haven't seen it in a couple of years, so I wanted to rewatch it. Whereas Phoenix, I saw a little bit more recently. If you remember, Ty and I did that one on a podcast episode. So it could be one of those two. And then another one also that we'll be doing this month is Left 4 Dead, Albert Pyun film. So be on the lookout for those. And then in terms of other pieces, we have the Threadless. If you go to the podcast description, you'll see a link to our Threadless page. There's a sale on everything on the Threadless site, so you can pick up in particular t-shirts. I think t-shirts are like $15. So you looking to get a new t-shirt, you want to get one. John Cross from After We've Diner did some really great VHS designs, or if you want some of the logo designs, we have the classic logo. We've got a few others that he did. So you follow the link in the podcast description and head over to the Threadless there. Spring's coming. You want to have some nice threads. I mean, hey, Easter's coming, right? I mean, what's going to look better at your Easter dinner or your Passover dinner than a really nice DTV connoisseur shirt where you've got, a VHS cover with a big mustachioed man firing a three-barreled shotgun or something like that. It's absolutely perfect. Order now, right? So you get it in time for that Easter dinner, so you can wow your friends and family as they're passing the ham or the brisket or whatever it is that you're eating for dinner there. So but definitely check that out. All right, so why don't we jump right in here? We'll have our theme song, and then when we come back, Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast will be on, and we will be looking at Replicant. All right, we are back, and I am joined by Sean Malloy from I Must Break This podcast. Welcome back, Sean.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate it. It's been a little bit since we last conversed, hasn't it? I mean, I know that on my show, gosh, you were on my show a couple years ago. It was when the world shut down, and we were still kind of in like a modified quarantine thing. I want to say it was like 2021, right? Yeah,
I think so. Was that Final Inquiry?
No. Well, the first time you joined me on my show was Final Inquiry, and
That's
then
right.
I did an Expendables episode, and you joined me for that. And now I think about it, I think after that you had me on for a Bruce Willis film.
Right. So you came on for Precious Cargo, and actually, the funny thing about that episode was we recorded it, I want to say like maybe a month or two before it came out that Bruce Willis had all those health issues. And so it was like we were kind of, I remember we were speculating. I think you even were speculating that like there might be kind of like a Bela Lugosi kind of, Ed Wood kind of thing going on. And the Randall scandal documentary actually kind of confirmed that apparently Randall Emmett was sort of propping Bruce Willis up to get these films, in which, I mean, I guess maybe the difference between Bela Lugosi and Bruce Willis, I think Bruce Willis did kind of want these movies made as well so he could have some money set aside for his family. Yeah, but it was, I mean, the hunch about it was right, that they were just sort of getting him through these pictures as many as possible.
And that is precisely why, actually, Matt, why I will not apologize for the comments or anything like that we made. Yeah. Because, it seems like once his diagnosis became public and everything, suddenly everybody started kind of backpedaling, like, oh, I felt bad ragging on these movies and things like that. And it's like, no, like these are terribly made movies that were made purely to either launder money or to do some kind of shady tax write-offs. And I mean, maybe Bruce Willis was not in a 100% mental state where maybe he knew what was going on, but his people, okay, and the people around him, his agents and his family, they saw what was going on, and they obviously liked the checks as well. You know what I mean? So I'm not gonna, you know what I mean? It's kind of amazing to me because, yeah, like I said, as soon as the news about his unfortunate aphasia diagnosis went public, which is tragic, don't get me wrong, but suddenly everyone was coming back and saying, well, it's really not fair to knock these movies. And it's like, no, like the intentions behind these movies from every player was wrong. Yeah. So
well, and when you watch that Randall scandal documentary, like the woman who, I think she was like the prop master on Midnight in the Switchgrass. I mean, she talks about like what it was like where, like Bruce Willis was confused a lot of the time, and Randall Emmett had like no sympathy for it. He was like, can we just get this scene in? Can we, this, whatever. And I mean, she was talking about how like crew were like sleeping like 3 or 4 to a room, some having to sleep on the floor because they were just trying to cut corners any way they could. So yeah, I totally agree with you there. That's like, like I know Ty from Puppets and I, we've been reviewing a lot of these and looking at them, and it is one of those things where it's like, I mean, the way the sort of the assembly line approach to those movies, yet maybe Bruce Willis isn't like, clear-headed enough to be able to know what's going on there, but the people making them know what they're doing, right? That they're just trying to pump out as much as they can and just sort of get some kind of international, sales and, streaming sales or whatever.
Exactly. So, but in any case, it is interesting, though. I mean, I've been talking about this on my show and with a couple of my buddies as well. It is really interesting how, I mean, man, your show, the DTV Connoisseur. I mean, man, you have tons of stuff to mine to where the show can go on, for ages. Right. But you're looking right now. I mean, if we're looking at the current state, EFO pretty much looks like they have folded, so we're not going to get any more from them. Millennium Films, who did like a lot of like kind of these independent direct-to-video action films, they're really slowing down. It does kind of make you wonder if here in the next couple years, if we're even going to see any more DTV independent action films. I don't think there's much money in it anymore. The market that we used to have really isn't there, so it is going to be interesting to see. But my speculation, to be perfectly honest, Matt, is here in the next year, maybe 2 at most. We're just not going to be seeing anymore, which is kind of sad to say in a weird way.
Yeah, because you're absolutely right. Because it's really like these kind of maybe like boutique operations that are really like putting out like this like 1 or 2 movies a year, and they're kind of putting everything into the movie. And even in those situations, they're up against like issues where, like, for example, they can't destroy the location that they're shooting in, so they've got to use fake explosions and fake blood squibs and stuff like that. And they've got so many corners that they have to cut. That even in those cases, it's like you're even if it's an earnest attempt, you're not getting the kind of movie that we used to get, like in the 90s and so on. I mean, it's funny. I was talking with screenwriter Tom Joliffe. I had him on for a previous episode that we were recording, talking about Army of One, the Dolph Lundgren movie, and it's just like, can you imagine somebody today saying like, we're going to just make this movie in the desert in LA and like even though they weren't real Ferraris, like we're not going to like take like whatever they were, Ford Fieros or whatever that they made look like, or like just that the whole idea, or even like that the scene in the garage in Army of One, or the Joshua Tree, like you just won't see that nowadays. Like nobody would give the budget for that.
No, I mean, I was talking about this with a buddy just the other day. In fact, with the passing of Carl Weathers, we were looking at those movies that he did with Hulk Hogan back in the late 90s. What was one? Shadow Warriors, I think, was one, and then another one. And I mean, at the time, they always, what is it they always say? Hindsight is 20/20. Yeah. But at the time, you looked at those films, and I mean, let's just be honest. Compared to like the big budget theatrical stuff, they just looked cheap. Okay, They didn't have the same kind of shine. And you looked at it and you're like, yeah, this is direct to video. However, if you look at that stuff today, Matt, especially compared to what we have, okay, you look at a film like Shadow Warriors, it has real explosions, it has multiple sets, it has helicopters, that, you know what I mean? It has all of these things that, I mean, that's just, these productions nowadays are completely chinsing out on. They just can't afford, and it's really kind of pathetic to think about it, but it's like, man, they can't even afford more than one set. They can't afford more than, they really can't even afford an explosion for that matter. And so what you're watching is just a lot of running around some kind of random warehouse and digital muzzle flashes. I mean, and it's, you know, I mean, on the one hand, I know it sounds like a backhanded compliment in a weird way. It's like, I'm kind of sad to see these films go, but on the other hand, it's kind of like, you know, maybe it's for the best if that's what we're getting.
Right. Well, because it's like so much of the budget is put into the actors, right? It's like,
exactly.
You know, and so then it's like, okay, and it's like one of those things for us, you know, who are watching it, like, yeah, definitely if you see like Dolph's face on the tin, or we see, you know, like Van Damme, who we're talking about today, see his face on the tin, we're gonna watch it, right? Or it's like, oh, I want to watch every Seagal movie, even if I like Seagal or not. And I've seen so many Seagal movies that I just have to watch them all. And it's like just seeing Seagal on the cover, it's like, I'm gonna watch this, you know. And it's an unfortunate reality of it that, like, if you had something that didn't have a name in it, but you put the money everywhere else, it is interesting to think, like, if there was a good buzz around it, if people would, you know, gravitate towards it and watch it.
Exactly. So, but yeah, no, it is, on one hand, like I said, it is kind of a sad state of affairs, but on the other hand, it is understandable, and you can't help but, I mean, you can't help but blame actors like the guy we're going to be talking about today, Jean-Claude Van Damme, for essentially, I mean, I've been saying it for a while. I mean, is he fully retired? Maybe not so much, but he's in a semi-retirement where he comes out maybe once every couple years if he sees a project as being worth his time. But then again, if you look at the level of these productions, like those Bruce Willis films, and to be honest, like a lot of what Mr. Lundgren has done, it's kind of like, look, I can't blame someone for looking at the state of the market and saying, you know what, I'm good to call it quits. You know what I mean? I mean, if you look at Van Damme, he's basically done that. Wesley Snipes, I think if Wesley Snipes really, really wanted to and really, really needed to keep working, we'd be seeing him pop up in a lot of these low rent films. But I think he's at a state where he's okay. You know what? I'll show up when Eddie Murphy calls me, and you know what? And that's it.
Yeah, right. Well, yeah, because you know, like one of the interesting things I think with Dolph is that, like, and I think this is something that, you know, we've talked about. I think that kind of this happened maybe in the mid to late 2000s when he wasn't getting the roles he wanted. So he started directing his own films, and he still has that in his arsenal. Like, he's, you know, Wanted Man, that's coming out soon, or I think just came out. It was when he directed it. And I think that might be the one thing that might keep him engaged a little bit longer, is that he can have a little bit more say in how the movie goes. Which, I mean, even when you get a budget, you're still kind of stuck with what you can make. But I think that might be an interesting thing that, like, I don't know if we'll see Van Damme get behind the camera like that, but I think that might be the thing that keeps Dolph in it a little bit longer.
Yeah. No, I mean, he recently had the film Wanted Man, which was released this past month. And, you know, I mean, you look at Wanted Man, and yeah, you can kind of see how it's maybe cutting corners in terms of its budget, but I think what also saves that one, to be perfectly honest, is the fact that that Dolph is directing it as well. And so, you know, his name is so much more at stake on that one than if he was just simply a gun for hire in front of the camera. So he really does pull out a lot of tricks to make it look bigger than I think it was able to be. But in the end, I mean, yeah, you look at, I mean, he's directed now, gosh, well over 10 films, I want to say.
Well, so I think Wanted Man was his 8th, like, feature. Oh, I've got sirens going on in the background if you can hear them here. Right. But I think Wanted Man was his 8th feature, but I'm not sure.
But if you look at that one compared to The Defender, or what I always like to say is, okay, you know, Castle Falls was cool, don't get me wrong. Wanted Man was okay, again, don't get me wrong. But look at those two films compared to The Defender and The Russian Specialist.
Yeah.
I will go to my grave. I love The Defender. I love The Russian Specialist. But if you look at those four films compared to one another, you can just see how much cheaper the market has gotten within the last. Well, I mean, gosh, as of this recording now, I guess the Defender went before the cameras about 20 years ago. So I guess a lot has happened in 20 years. It doesn't feel like it, but a lot has.
Yeah, that's a great point because yeah, another one that I would put in that category is Command Performance, which, you know, I mean, that's probably a great example of the kind of movie that just isn't made. I mean, you know, thinking about that, like not one that Dolph directed, but The Best Man, right? And you compare The Best Man as like a Die Hard in a blank movie compared to Command Performance, which is, you know, another Die Hard in a blank, and there's just so much more fun going on in Command Performance, and it's like it's not like The Best Man's horrible, but you just I don't know if you're going to get another Command Performance again, or like you said, Defender or something like that.
No, it is interesting. I mean, and you know, doing my podcast, it really has. I mean, I feel like a lot of times with a lot of the episodes, I'm kind of hitting some of the same points. So that's why I've started to kind of move in the show. I've been doing a lot of combo episodes where we look at multiple films in one particular episode. And so, you know, I try my best not to hit a lot of the same points, but it really has been really interesting. I never thought that I'd get to this point where I'm kind of getting caught up or close to the end. But, I mean, it's really fascinating. I didn't think that like I said, I didn't think I'd get to this point, but now that I have, it's fair to say, I mean, I can confidently, I guess, say that I can put Mr. Lundgren's career into, I guess, phases or stages, if you will, and a lot of that can be determined, again, due to budget, shooting days, all of that, but also where he was in terms of his career in his prime. You know what I mean?
Yeah, because I was going to ask you about that because you kind of have that perspective now with having done so many of his movies, and I know you and I have talked about, like, you know, different times that I was going to be on to talk about films or something like that, and you've talked about some of these phases, like kind of like that, maybe that 2010s phase where a lot of the films aren't that great, you know, or like kind of the late 90s. Into the 2000s, you know, some of those kinds of things. But yeah, I mean, is that something you've kind of, like you said, you've kind of picked out sort of these phases, or kind of been able to see sort of the ebbs and flows of his career?
Oh, most definitely. And I mean, you really don't, again, talking about hindsight, you really didn't notice it then when it was happening or when it was going on, but you look back upon it, and I mean, okay, yeah, if you look, for example, Dolph's career from about, I'd say, 96, 97 to about 2004. I mean, man, that was some of the lowest, you know what I mean, films. But then if you look, okay, it's like, well, okay, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he was falling on pretty hard times. He wasn't really. I mean, I happen to really enjoy the film End of Days, but I know that's not put up there in his best films. And then if you look at Stallone, to be perfectly honest, Matt, around that time, I thought that Stallone was basically almost done with his career, because he was doing some kind of direct-to-video stuff, and he was falling on hard times. I mean, I think that happens with all these guys. They have their ebbs and their flows. They have their comebacks. They have their highs and they have their lows. And I think the only way out of it is through it. The only way out is to just keep going and keep, you know, trying your best and trying to find the next project that you think is going to hit. But then again, you look at some of these other projects and it's like, well, you know, maybe Dolph needed a new car and he wanted to quickly pay off that car payment. You know, with a lot of these films too, if you look at a lot of them, the star is, like, for example, Van Damme or Dolph Lundgren especially, you know, their name is on there as a producer.
Yes.
Okay, as an executive producer. And so, look, I'm not going to speculate and assume that shady stuff is going on, but you see that and it's kind of like, okay, they had to get a huge paycheck for this job, especially if they're taking on a producer role. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I mean, I think, you know, with Dolph, right, there's that period, right, where he splits with his wife, and I think it's, you know, not to cast aspersions on his personal life, but I think that's kind of always I don't know if trope is the right word, or kind of a classic scenario, right? Where, actor divorces, they've got alimony payments to the ex-wife and child support, the ex-wife, but now they've got the new girlfriend that also, it requires money. And I mean, I think the most famous example is Shaq, right? Because Shaq was like, I think it was after Kobe kind of outed him, Kobe Bryant, when Kobe Bryant was on trial for sexual harassment, right? He like made some comment about how, I should just pay them off the way Shaq does, and suddenly it was like, Shaq was married with 6 kids, and that kind of put it, now you see, Shaq is selling everything, right? He's Carnival Cruises, Gold Bond football, all that kind of stuff. But I think the other thing too with Dolph, maybe this is maybe even a better reasoning for it, is that I think after he does Expendables, I think he got a lot more offers for those, like you said, those like one-day shoots that pays off the car, pays for a new kitchen island or something like that. And it's like, it's kind of hard, when somebody, your agent's telling you, here's one day's shooting, and you can pay for, a new stone pizza oven in the backyard or something. It's like, how do you can't begrudge somebody for taking that.
Absolutely not. I mean, you look at a film like The Best Man, which is not good by any means. Right. Okay. And you look at it and you're like, oh my God, like what was Dolph thinking? And it's like, well, I know exactly what he's thinking, because to be honest, I would have done the same thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Show up for 3 days, and you have to throw on a fake machine gun, okay, and walk around an empty casino and look tough for 3 days worth of work, and that would pay for a good chunk of a vacation. Yeah. Of course you would. You know what I mean? And I think that to be honest, that's one of the things. I mean, going to this film, Replicant, that's one of the things about this film that has always really fascinated me, because it's not like Van Damme was in his prime, I will say. But he's also in a state where he still really, really looks good. You know what I mean? He can still do the moves. He can still, I mean, he's not, being stunt doubled as much in that film as he is nowadays. You know what I mean? And I mean, there's a lot that I appreciate about Replicant, and the fact that, I mean, I don't even know where to start with this one, because I have a lot to say about it. But it was filmed and shot in, what was that, I think 1999, 2000. So obviously his star power was waning, but he was not at the state where he, became in 10 years. And so there's a lot good about this film, to where I think if it had gone theatrical as intended, I think it could have surprised many. I'm not saying it would have rocked the box office or anything like that, but I think it is a really good film to kind of let people know, oh, hey, wait a minute, Van Damme is still around and he can still do things that are pretty cool. You know what I mean? Yeah,
because one of the things I was thinking about with this movie, kind of, is we kind of, like you said, do a little background on, because like you said, he wasn't. I think he was so the movie came out in 2001, and he was born in 1960. So I guess he was 41 at that time. So, and he definitely, I mean, he's playing a character who's a little bit younger. That's one of the things you notice, right, with him, that as he goes on, I think he's kind of starting to lean into being older now. But there's definitely some that you look at with him. What was the one that he did with the where he lost his kidney, Pound of Flesh.
Oh, Pound of Flesh.
Right, where he's playing somebody born in the 70s in that one. But I think he's kind of changing now to do that. But, one of the things that's interesting about this movie, I think, like you talked about, where, they were looking maybe for a theatrical release, is, I think this, I'm trying to think if this was before or... Okay, so it was the same year as Exit Wounds, right? When, so Seagal kind of has his last gasp in 2001, and I think there might have been a sense that Van Damme had that same last gasp in him, and that this might have been the one to do it. And it does kind of feel a little bit, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because it feels a little bit more higher quality. I mean, you got Michael Rooker in there as well. But then also there's some of the other pieces where it's like it's taking place in Seattle, but it's definitely being shot in Vancouver. Right. And you kind of think of like Sleepless in Seattle that is in Seattle. This doesn't really have that part of it. But yeah, I know what you mean, that like I think they wanted this to be his chance to get back in the theater, and it just didn't quite happen.
And it could have. I mean, I'm going to say it, like, again, and I want to stress, I don't think this film would have rocked the box office in any kind of way, but I do think it would have been a relatively modest hit. You brought up Exit Wounds, which, yeah, I mean that was Seagal's comeback movie. His comeback really didn't last long, but that was his big comeback. And that's the thing that I'm glad you brought it up, because that's an awesome segue. That's the cool thing that I've always liked about Replicant, or one of the many things I've liked about it, is it has all of the feelings of being a comeback movie for Van Damme. Now, it's not like Van Damme really went away. Okay, if you look at throughout the mid '90s, that's when he signed a contract with Sony. So he had done some pretty cool films. I actually think Double Team is a ton of fun. Actually,
Yes.
Maximum Risk is really, really cool. But then that's kind of when he started doing some direct-to-video stuff. Okay, Legionnaire went direct-to-video. Then he did Desert Heat. That also went direct-to-video. But if you look at a film like Replicant, there are so many things about it to where, yeah, it's a total comeback type piece. I mean, for one, you have Van Damme, who's going against type and playing a dark character. Well, actually, I guess we should say he plays two characters, but one of the characters he plays is a serial killer.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that is pretty wacky. Okay, you wouldn't really expect that from him. It's directed by Ringo Lam, who is, an amazing director from Hong Kong who directed Maximum Risk. So you have that going for it as well. And then, like I said, there's just, this film is so... It's weird because, it's an ugly film. It's not a pretty film. Because he's going after mothers. The serial killer, the Torch, is going after mothers, which is not pleasant by any means. But on the other hand, if you look at that, that's something new and something unique that I think, had this gone theatrical, I think it would have. It's a fine reminder to kind of let audiences know, hey, Van Damme again is still around. Okay, he's still. Everything we love about him, he's going to do in this film that we've seen him do before. The splits and the kicks and all that stuff. But it's also going to show audiences, hey, wait a minute, he can act. And that's the other thing I've loved about this film is, you get to, this is like one of the first times I remember where thinking to myself, like, wow, like, he's actually come into his own a bit. He's pretty good.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree there. I'll do a quick synopsis here, because I think the Van Damme acting piece of this is a piece that I wanted to get into as well, because I think there's some really cool, some really great conversations there for that. So, just on a quick synopsis. So the film, like you said, Van Damme plays a serial killer, the Torch, who kills single mothers and then he sets them on fire after they die. And Michael Rooker, who is an aging police detective, has been trying to catch him, and he's always just missed him. And then the federal government calls Rooker in after he retires from the force and says, hey, we've got this thing that we've been doing as like this anti-terrorist thing where if we have a terrorist that we need information from, we essentially create a replicant of him, like a clone, but it's this thing. It's a little different because it's a replicant, and it has like a psychic connection to the person we're trying to get information from. So we've got some DNA from the Torch. We can make this replicant of him, and then if you bring that replicant around, he might be able to connect with your killer, and you can catch him. And so then, of course, Van Damme is playing this replicant character who's sort of like trying to understand the world, is kind of not familiar with it, almost like a child in a way, whereas Rooker refers to him as developmentally delayed. But at the same time, he's starting to get these psychic visions, and so then it's a matter of like, okay, can they catch the Torch in time before he kills again? But also the Torch starts to manipulate him, and so then there's a sense of will the replicant, will he help Rooker in taking out the Torch and saving the day, or will he turn on Rooker? And so it's a matter of where that ends up going. So yeah, that's kind of I think the bulk of it there. I don't know if I missed any pieces of there. It didn't seem that complicated when I was thinking in my head when I was watching it.
No, you said it perfectly. And again, talk about a tour de force acting performance for Van Damme. You know what I mean? That's the one thing that I think is really cool about it. I've always said that if I was an actor, one of my dream roles would have been in the film Face Off, because you get to play both the good guy and the bad guy, regardless if you're the Castor Troy character or the Sean Archer character. Yeah. You get the best of both worlds, and you get to play both of these both of these characters. Okay, and that's what Van Damme gets to do. And again, I mean, again, was I expecting him to get Oscar nominated for this film? Absolutely not. I mean, but his serial killer character is frightening. I mean, he is downright frightening. This is one of the first times where we really saw. I mean, I guess if you want to count Black Eagle, Van Damme played a villain in that. Same thing with No Retreat, No Surrender. Yeah. But for all intents and purposes, his Van Damme's first movie was Bloodsport, right? Right. But I mean, this was like one of the first times where we really got to see him play a mean bad guy, right? But then he also gets to play the good guy. And what's really kind of cool about this too, Matt, is, I mean, I would say Van Damme really isn't even the main character. Yeah. Okay, I would say Michael Rooker is more the main character than anything else, and so that's why I think it is such a great comeback film, because you have Van Damme again, okay, going against type, playing a villain. We didn't see too many of these action heroes play villains either around these times, especially a killer of single mothers. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty bizarre. But then he's essentially playing a toddler who's very naive to the world around him. I mean, and that's. I mean, again, I'm going to say it. I think his acting really surprises on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I thought about this too, because like you said, you know, you wouldn't see a lot of these actors wanting to play a villain like this. And I was trying to think who else would even want to try a role like this. Like, I know, like Scott Adkins, for example, he kind of pushes to kind of show that he's a really he wants to have that reputation as being a great actor, and I wonder if he might try something like this, but I don't think he'd be able to pull it off the way Van Damme did. And you know Dolph has played villains, you know, for sure. I mean, obviously Universal Soldier comes to mind, and of course his very first movie, right, Rocky, he was technically the villain, but I don't think any of them would want to take this role. I don't think any of them would want to play the two different characters. They're so disparate, so different. And I don't think any of them wanted to play, like you said, the one that's essentially a toddler, the replicant character. I don't think any of them would want to touch that role. The fact that Van Damme plays this...
Can you imagine... Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you.
Oh, no.
Can you imagine Steven Seagal
right.
voluntarily getting into a vat of goo,
right?
You know what I mean, and pretending to wake up, you know, from that. I mean, that's something that, I mean, even like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, we didn't see them really get that down and dirty. Right. You know what I mean, for their commitment to a role. Yeah. You know what I mean? But I mean, the fact, I mean, that the scene where the clone is birthed, right, and he's just in this, like, just. This, I don't know what you want to call it, like this just gelatinous goo or whatever. Right, he's waking up. Right. I mean, that shows like, wow, he's really. I mean, that's the cool thing about this. You could just really tell how invested and how much Jean-Claude really cared about not just this film, but about this role, his performance, everything about it. I think a lot of that, too, is the fact that he has such an admiration and respect for Ringo Lam.
Oh, yeah.
And so with Ringo Lam being on board, I think he knew, okay, I got to come to play. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think, you know, it's funny because, you know, you talk about, like, you know, I don't know that he would get nominated for an Oscar for this. I mean, the movie that I thought he should have been nominated for an Oscar was JCVD. And it's kind of funny, like, I think with this movie, when I saw it the first time, I was more hung up on the whole, like, psychic connection element of it. And I was like, that just seems so ludicrous that I can't, you know. And I think, you know, it felt like there were times where it was like, he's, you know, the replicant's a toddler here and he has more understanding there. And, you know, those kinds of things I got more hung up on. But watching it this second time around for, you know, we were doing it for the podcast here, I had this appreciation for it. I was like, he really goes out on a limb here and really takes a chance. And, you know, he really wasn't asked to act like this at any point in his career before this. And so the fact that he even took a role like this, it's almost like it was like buried there all this time. And he just, he really wanted to push it.
Yeah, no. I mean, I don't think there's anything more that I can add to that. But yeah, no, I mean, you can just see how invested and how much he really cares for this film and wants to be there. And what's really interesting about it, if we can go back real quick to the marketing for this one, again, I remember this is one that I followed because I remember when it started filming, I want to say it was late 99, early 2000. I was following the production on this one, and I did think that it was going to go theatrical. And I was being fairly naive at the time, but I remember thinking, okay, well, this is going to be pretty cool. I'm looking forward to seeing when it comes to theaters. And then it just sat, and we didn't hear anything about it, if you remember. You know what I mean? And so I remember it was, it finally got released to VHS and DVD in October of 2001, I believe. But before that, it was announced that Artisan was going to be picking it up. Now, Artisan around this time, they were notorious. They were known for being a direct-to-video label. But every now and again, they would get, they'd get a few films that would go theatrical, right? Like they had the Blair Witch Project, and they had Stir of Echoes, I remember, which is a really cool Kevin Bacon thriller.
I think the Punisher was theirs too. I think the Thomas Jane Punisher. I think
yes and no. It was going to be there. Yes, it was going to go theatrical, but then Lionsgate bought them out.
Oh, okay.
And that's why, it was released by Lionsgate. But it was it was an Artisan film, and it was one of the few that was again going to go theatrical. But so again, I thought, okay, hopefully this gets a theater release. It did not. But what's really kind of cool, man, talk about signs of the times. But it was, I remember, because it was going direct to video, I remember magazines like Entertainment Weekly and FHM, if you remember that one.
Yes, yeah.
The offshoot of Maxim or whatever. I remember those magazines getting like half-page spreads advertising this film coming out, saying, hey, pick up the DVD or rent the VHS. You know what I mean? So they were still, it's interesting. Van Damme he wasn't so much of a box office name anymore, but he was also, at that point, really becoming a direct-to-video name. And so they were able to still market it on that level. And then it was maybe less than 6 months later or so, the USA Network did like a huge premiere for the film, and it premiered on USA. So he was able to kind of attract fans that way as well, who liked watching his stuff on cable.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I kind of forgot about that. That USA was big. Obviously, Blackjack was the USA original, the Dolph film, but they broke a lot of the Van Damme and Seagal movies. That was like a place where you could see a lot when their direct-to-video stuff was really starting to kind of, when they were kind of really getting more direct-to-video in the 2000s. USA, I forgot about that they showed a lot of those, and Replicant was one, because that might have been when I first watched it. It wasn't in 2001 though. It was like later, but I feel like I might have DVR'd it on USA when I was just getting the hang of DVR at that time. But because I remember a lot of the Derailed was another one that was on USA or Spike at that time. You could get and again, this was a period of direct to video where I think like you're right that we get a lot of these really good movies that were supposed to go theatrical. Like you could really see the difference between Replicant and like Desert Heat or Inferno that came out. The movie that he had come out right before this one. It's a very different movie, right? It's Inferno is essentially PM Entertainment, and even though it has a ton of names in it, the production value is not what Replicant is.
Oh no! You hit the nail on the head. Right. But again, you look at it and you think like, okay. Back then, though, there was still money, into those films, because again, you had the blockbusters, you had the Hollywood videos or whatever, who were also banking on rentals, DVD sales, things of that nature. So of course, you would have a direct-to-video film come out that still had 20 million pumped into it.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Now, that's unheard of. Okay, now these films are made for barely $1 million, maybe $2 million, if that even, and most of that is in the star's pocket. You know what I mean? And so, it is kind of cool to live in a time. Was I a little disappointed that it didn't go theatrical? Sure, but I remember at the time hearing that it was going to go direct to video. Man, I felt like Kramer on that episode of Seinfeld. I was thinking to myself, well. That makes me the premiere, baby. And I went to a Best Buy after work, and I bought a brand new copy. I think on the day of, I think it was $24.99, something like that. And went home, and it was really actually kind of cool because, at the time, if we're talking the early days of DVD, it had a commentary track by both. There was one commentary track by Jean-Claude, and then another one by Michael Rooker, which was really kind of cool. And at the time, I didn't really. I mean, this is going way back, but the idea of watching a movie and then hearing the stars talk about it while watching it was like a whole new experience that was so much fun. You know what I mean? So there was that. I think there's on the DVD, there's like some storyboard comparisons between the film and how they mapped it out. Nowadays with these films, I don't even think they're storyboarding anything.
Right.
You know what I mean? So.
Well, yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, like you talk about. I mean, the budget on this movie was $17 million in 2001 dollars, and I mean, I always go back to the interview that you did with line producer Benjamin Sachs, where he really gave a lot of insight. I mean, of course, he was almost kind of predicting where the DTV world was going at that time. Like, this is what you can expect, And I remember he talked about how, like, distributors are, they'd come to him with a movie idea and they'd say, okay, this is a script we've got. How much can you make it for? And he'd be like, oh, I can make it for $5 million. And they're like, great, make it for $3 million, and you've got it. And so yeah, I mean, anything being made for $17 million. I mean, who's getting $17 million to make a direct to video movie now? Because you wouldn't make it back, right? When would you get that $17 million back? Whereas, like, even though this made under $1 million worldwide gross in the theater. I'm sure it made plenty in DVD sales, and there just aren't DVD sales anymore.
No, exactly. I mean, at most, what these films can hope for and bank on is people paying between $4.99 to $6.99 to rent it, through their cable provider. But a lot of people just assume, myself included, I'll be honest, a lot of people just assume, I'll wait for it to become free on Prime. Yeah. Or I'll wait for it to go to Netflix, or if I'm really lucky, I'll wait for it to go to Tubi.
Yes.
And so when you hear those kind of margins, it's kind of like, well, it makes sense why these films now are made specifically to be sold to those streaming services. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, because if you think about this movie, right? It came out in 2001, so now it's like any money it makes on Tubi is bonus, right? It's extra. It's it's nice, for them. Whereas like a new movie, it's like you're already starting in the red, and you've got to sort of keep making money to get. We hear about it, of course, on the big screen. I mean, the Marvels just came out on Disney Plus, and it's like, the movie had a $200 million budget and only made like $120 million, and it's like, is Disney Plus going to be able to make that back on subscriptions? It's probably not, and it's like. You're constantly always hearing that about, like, is the movie making its money back? And so it's like, yeah, if we spend $2 million to make a film, are we going to get that on Tubi streaming or Amazon rentals, right? Probably not. And there's no DVD market. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see if we get a DVD market again, because, but I don't know, because I know, like, you talked about buying this on Best Buy, and I think they've completely gotten rid of their DVD sales now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and which is sad, because I remember, again, back when these films had money into them, that was kind of the highlight of my, I was going to say day, but to be honest, week, if it makes me sound pathetic saying that. But I would look forward to, on the Tuesday afternoon, and when I got off work, going to Best Buy or Circuit City, remember them, Circuit City?
Yes, yeah.
And buying the new Van Damme movie. I mean, if we just run down the list, I bought them all on their day of release, man. I really did. Whether it was Second in Command, the hardcore, what else did I get on day of release? I did buy Derailed, sadly, even though I knew what that was going to be. And then now, if you look at the current state that we're in, where he doesn't do much, and when he does do something, you know that it's going to be nothing more than a glorified cameo. Yeah. I've decided to save my money and just wait for it to be on Tubi or whatever. I've now, I think with a lot of these guys, even like the most hardcore action fans, Matt, people like you and me, we're really in this weird kind of state where if you had talked to us like back in the late 90s, early 2000s, the new Bruce Willis movie, the new Steven Seagal movie, the new Van Damme movie, man, we watched that day of release.
Yes.
If not day of release, then weekend of release. Yeah. But now, I don't know, I mean, I'm speaking for myself. I don't want to say that you're like this, but I'm at the state now where there are some Van Damme movies I haven't seen.
Right,
There
me
are some
too.
Steven Seagal movies that I haven't seen. Even Dolph. I mean, I do the Dolph podcast. So a lot of these films now, within the past 10 years, I'm checking out for the first time.
Yeah.
Because I know, let's be honest, I know what the turnout is going to be.
Yeah. Well, because I think the best example of this, right? And I think I talked about this with maybe like Ty and Brett from Compens on a few years ago, but you think of Blackwater, right? In 2018, Dolph and Van Damme, like that is the kind of movie that 10 years before, had that movie come out 10 years before, like you said, it would have been like, must see, right? Like it would have been like we, mark your calendars. We're gonna, Blackwater, when it's out, we're gonna grab it. Either put it in my Netflix queue so I can rent it the moment like it's available, or like you said, go to Best Buy on that Tuesday and pick up a copy of it. And Blackwater didn't have any kind of buzz like that I remember. It was like just like, oh, Dolph and Van Damme made another movie together. Check it out, And of course, it was a little on the lackluster side. So I think that's a great example there of just like. There isn't that kind of that appointment viewing anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. But again, if we go back to Replicant, this was appointment viewing. I mean, is it one of Jean-Claude's best films? Probably not.
Yeah.
I would still confidently put it well within his top 20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Just because I think there's so much to appreciate about this one. We haven't really talked about it, but Michael Rooker, who is absolutely off the rails in this film,
yes.
as the stereotypical cop who won't stop. You know,
Right.
He's really cool. We should probably say his girlfriend in the movie is played by Catherine Dent, who later went on to kind of find fame. She did the show The Shield,
Yeah.
and so I remember every week, what was that on? I want to say that was on Thursday nights. Every Thursday night when I'd watch The Shield, it'd be like, hey, I remember her in Replicant, man.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think they're both great. Like, because the interesting thing with Catherine Dent's character, so like you said, Michael Rooker is kind of almost the main character, right? And it's almost like these two Van Damme characters sort of are satellites that sort of rotate around him as the film goes on. But with Catherine Dent's character, we lose her for a bit, right? At the beginning, when when Rooker's kind of going to the government. Site to kind of find out about Van Damme and Laurel, so we lose her for a bit, and then we get her back in. And the thing I liked about her character is that it, between her and Rooker, like one, it kind of gave Rooker a little bit more humanity in his role, acting opposite her. But then also like the way she acted opposite him, like she almost kind of checked his character some, and I don't want to say almost gave us kind of an anchor to kind of, because it's not like Rooker's character is someone that we can fully, I don't want to say, what's the word, relate to, right? Because he, like you said, he's a bit like kind of obsessed and like just, he's violent at times. He really just goes for it. So I really liked her performance. Her performance is the kind of performance that, again, with a direct-to-video movie, you wouldn't get a Catherine Dent playing that part. And so it enhances the film having her there.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she does an amazing job, and I really like, if we go to the Michael Rooker character, I really like that they give him these little touches that you wouldn't really expect in these type of films. I mean, I would go as far as saying this film really isn't even an action movie; it's certainly more along the lines of a thriller, which is kind of the more prestigious action movie, right?
Right. Yeah.
But I love so many little things. Like, for example, they give his character a mom.
Yes.
Right? Like, isn't he? I'm trying to remember. Is he living with his mom before he moves in with Catherine Dent?
I think so, because I believe, because there's a scene later on. Because initially I thought he was just bringing Van Damme's character, the replicant, to his mom's house to like question him or whatever, to stash him there. But no, there's like another scene later on that lets us know that I think he's living with her. And I don't know if he's living with her in the sense that like he's helping to care for her. It's like one of those kind of things where it's like she's maybe living there at his place because she can't care for herself. And I think there was also supposed to be an element because of the whole mom thing, that was maybe a piece of it that they didn't get into enough, right? That the relationship with his mom, to almost sort of juxtapose it with the Van Damme piece there. But yeah, that's really interesting scene, right, when she kind of shows up and she's kind of telling him, like, what are you doing? Because he's beating up Jean-Claude Van Damme's the Replicant character.
Yeah, I mean, but what a crazy, like, wacky little touch,
Right.
to put in this film. Like, how often do you see your hero, okay, regardless if he's the lead detective on the case or whatever it may be, to see his elderly mom?
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, you just don't see those kind of touches. I'm trying to remember. I think in Marked for Death, I want to say in Marked for Death, we saw Steven Seagal's mom, but then she really gets one line where she says, "Hello, it's so good to have you back," and then we never see that character again.
Right. Yes.
But yeah, I mean that's really kind of cool. I love the scene. I mean, I know we're kind of bouncing all over, but I love the scene. It's right before the clone is created, but it's the scene kind of letting us know that okay, Jake will not quit.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's his retirement party, and Van Damme's Torch character calls him up to kind of taunt him,
right.
And he just goes off on him in front of all these guests at his party and everything like that. The dialogue is a little cheesy, I will say, but again, it works because I'm going to keep repeating this, and this will be the last time, I promise. But it works because you have two actors who are 100% committed and invested to what they are doing.
Yeah. Well, because, the thing you could say about Michael Rooker is that he's someone who a lot of times he's playing like a supporting character in a film. Or like a bad guy. Obviously, Mallrats was the first time I guess Jake, Portrait of a Serial Killer, I guess that would have been, or Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, not Jake. I don't know where I got Jake from. But, I know that's one that he did, I think, right? Am I getting the right serial killer movie that he did?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay. And of course, right, he has that small, the Yondu character in Guardians of the Galaxy. So he's kind of does a lot of supporting roles, but I think he's someone who, when he gets the opportunity to play a lead like this, that he really goes for it. Another movie that recently he did was White Elephant with Jesse V. Johnson as a director. So kind of another solid action director like Ringo Lam, directing Rooker there. But I think you're right that like, not having Rooker, having somebody else play this part, we wouldn't have gotten the intensity that Rooker brought to it. It's like he wasn't looking at this as like, oh, I'm doing like a direct-to-video movie, or, I'm doing a lower-end theatrical film that may or may not be theatrical. He looked at it as like, this is a chance for me to really shine here, and I'm going to really give this part my all.
Exactly. I mean, going back to what we said earlier is, this is my opportunity for a comeback, and this is my comeback vehicle.
Right.
And unfortunately, that didn't happen. But I think it did get, again, kind of going on what we talked about earlier. It did get a fairly decent rollout, considering where the market was at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think that's the one thing I think about direct-to-video. I mean, obviously, you think like the PM Entertainment days, and I know Gary Daniels has talked about like that sort of that 90s period where there was just a lot of room for DTV stuff, because it was like, you had video store shelves that wanted to fill up with different product. But then you also had like HBO and Showtime and Cinemax that had, hours that they needed to fill for programming as well. And so they were looking for things, and like, channels like USA, as we talked about, that they were looking for programming as well. And so something like this would fit in there. So there were a lot of places that this could make its money back if it didn't make it theatrically. That nowadays, USA Network, I look at USA, I think they play like Fast and Furious movies because they're Universal, but they don't really play this kind of movie anymore. And so, I think that's the other thing, is that like, you could get away with a movie like this not making its money in the theater, and nowadays it's like, okay, if it doesn't make it in the theater, where's it going to make that money back?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything more we can say. Obviously it's fun to kind of long for these days, but on the other hand, it is kind of sad. And if you look back, I know that a lot of directors and things like that have talked about this, but the great thing about the video store was that even if the film had been out for, between 6 months to a year or whatever, it still had a place on the video store shelves, to where when you walked into the video store, the new releases all hung around for a couple months. Same thing with the older films, but they all had their own place. Okay, the problem nowadays with streaming, okay, and I'm saying something that I imagine you've echoed as well. The problem now with what we have today is that all of this content just kind of gets dumped out into the ether, out into the world, and there's really no, I mean, with the video store, you'd walk in and you'd talk to the guy behind the counter, or you'd kind of talk with the people who were in there about, hey, what are you renting? There was word of mouth, okay, and there was also, publications that would kind of get the word out there about certain titles. Now, there's not so much of that. I mean, I've been saying this for a while, but I mean, if you look at Netflix and their model, I mean, it's frustrating because when they drop a new title, okay, it'll be on the home screen, it'll be like on the main interface for about a week or two, but then after that, it's just gone. Yeah. And it's just kind of dropped off into this purgatory of sorts where you don't hear about it anymore.
Yeah, they are probably the biggest with the churn and burn model. And they've even talked about it like that. It's like, we create this sort. We create our own like social media buzz around something, so that we make it something happening, and then we just move on to the next thing. And they do it with TV shows too. It's like, if a show gets to 3 seasons and they're good with it after 3 seasons, and they move on to something else. And I think for us growing up, in the 80s, where you would have TV shows that would like push to get to that 10th season to get to like rerun syndication. And, those later seasons were horrible, where you had like, adding the new kid, or the very special episodes. I mean, they were just scraping the bottom of the barrel to just get to that rerun syndication period that, yes, maybe cutting it sooner would have been good, but also 3 seasons is not always enough either for a lot of, really good shows. I mean, Sopranos, Mad Men, those like, they needed more seasons than 3 seasons, and it was good that they were able to end when they wanted to. And so, yeah, the Netflix churn and burn approach, it's like, like you said, it's like something's there, and then you have trouble finding it again, and it because it's just you get kind of inundated with Netflix, right? That's one thing I don't like about Netflix is when you go there, it's just like they're just kind of pushing all the new stuff at you, and then like you're just like, I want to find the search button and I want to search for this one title and see if you still have it, and you're like something like this, like they might put money into something like this, but like they're only going to push it for like you said, a short period of time before they move on to something else.
And to be perfectly honest, Matt, I can't think of too many Netflix original movies that rival Replicant.
Yeah.
To be honest, and I'm not just saying this as a Jean-Claude Van Damme loyalist or anything like that. I mean, they did The Night Comes for Us, which was a martial arts movie that I really, really dug. I really enjoyed Triple Frontier, the one with Ben Affleck and everything. But that's really about it. I can't think of any other action movie they've done that rivals Replicant and delivers the same type of thrills and twists and turns and things like that Replicant delivered. I mean, if you look at the end real quick, I mean, gosh, there's so many things that I could say about this movie, Matt. I mean, but I love, the final fight, the final battle, okay? When Michael Rooker is squaring off against Torch, and then you have the clone kind of gets in the mix of it as well. I mean, it takes place in a hospital, right? I mean, we don't. Well, I guess it starts in a hospital, but then it moves outside of that. I mean, but that was really kind of cool. And the one thing I'll always remember are these like cool like little shots that Ringo Lam employs that you just don't get nowadays. Like there's a shot at the end. It's when I'm sure you remember the shot. It's one that's always stayed with me, though, to be honest. But it's when Jean-Claude's clone character is beaten up, but he realizes the only person to end this is going to be him, and so he grabs the gun out of a bloody pan. Do you remember that?
Oh yes, yeah.
And I mean, and that's just such a cool shot that you would not see in many films today. I mean, I guess maybe a John Wick film, but again, the John Wick films are on a whole other level. You know what I mean? But I'll always remember that shot of his character just completely beaten down and then just picking up this weapon out of it's like a bedpan that's just filled with blood. You know what I mean? And going along with what I said earlier, I mean, this film is dark.
Yeah.
Okay, and that scene right there is pretty dark. But you know, I love those little touches. You know what I mean? And it's those little touches that where you can tell it's like, man, they intended for this to go theatrical. Yeah. I honestly think they did. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because Ringo Lam as a director at that time, right? It was like he was doing Hong Kong stuff, obviously, but then like Maximum Risk, that was a theatrical movie, and I think they thought, okay, he could come back here and do something again that would be theatrical like that. And I mean, that's the thing too, right? Is that when you have a director like Ringo Lam, he was up there as one of the better Hong Kong directors. If you kind of think of other names, like John Woo. He was in that category of director. And when you have a director like that doing a movie like this, Blackjack's another example, I think, with John Woo, where it's like it's a TV movie. The idea is kind of silly that that Lundgren's afraid of white, but it's shot in a way that makes it more compelling. And I think this one's even better than Blackjack in that sense, that Ringo Lam, as a director, he puts something together here that is much more compelling.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if we go back earlier into the movie, but the ambulance chase scene, there's the scene at the beginning when the Torch character, the serial killer character, is trying to escape, and Jake, that's Michael Rooker's detective character, is chasing him down. Okay, and that scene where they're through the parking garage, I mean, that's what's also really kind of cool about this is, I mean, this film, I mean, okay, no, it was not working with a budget of what Van Damme maybe had been working with prior. Okay, this was not on the same level as, say, Time Cop or Sudden Death or any of those bigger ones, right? But what's also kind of cool is they work within their parameters, okay? And you can really tell with that ambulance chasing, because what they decide, okay, we're going to do a chase scene. Well, we can't really close down streets to do it. Well, you know what? Let's do it in a parking garage, okay? I mean, and that's kind of that's a genius touch when you think about it, okay? So they put a chase scene in the parking garage. Well, it's not multiple cars, really. It's just an ambulance, okay, that is going haywire throughout this entire parking garage, okay? So instead of two cars, we just have the one. But, man, the way they film it is, I mean, it's rocking all over the place in the parking garage. There's even one scene where it jumps over a speed bump, so, like, the roof of the ambulance hits the top of the parking garage. I mean,
yes.
Little stuff like that, man. I mean, you can tell, like, again, that's the other thing maybe that we haven't said as well. Maybe this did have a lower budget. I think they also had time. That's the thing maybe that I think we probably should have front-loaded with this conversation, is a lot of these films nowadays just simply don't have the time to put together a fancy product, okay? But this film, I mean, you can tell that they had well over a month to shoot it. I'd be willing to. I wouldn't be surprised maybe if it was even 2 months, which is just unheard of nowadays.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too at that time, right, was that you could film in Canada, and you could get your budget to stretch a lot further, and then when you add in the fact that Ringo Lam, I think, coming from the Hong Kong background, he knew how to do a lot more with less, and it's almost like, I think nowadays a lot of times when it's do more with less, you're thinking of like David Dakota or Fred Olen Ray, where they're like, here, just give me a mansion in 3 days and I'll give you a movie, and I'll get it, I'll deliver it under budget, we'll take care of it, and you can throw it on Hallmark or Lifetime or whatever, and we're good there. But Ringo Lam is someone who's like, I really want to make a high quality movie, right? He had a standard that he needed to adhere to, right? That he had a reputation as one of the better Hong Kong directors, so he wanted to have his reputation intact with a movie like this. So he wasn't going to put out an inferior quality product, and I think that's an important part of it. That I think he was looking at it. Obviously, like that ambulance scene, like you said, where he's, I don't even know how they did that, where they had the ambulance, like you said, it was hitting the ceiling on the parking garage, and it was like causing pieces of that parking garage to fall below, as it was hitting it. That was like a touch, or like an added detail that you just never see that in car chases nowadays, that kind of thing. But back then, it was more common.
Yeah, most definitely. I don't know, man. I look back upon this particular film, this particular period, as I'm pretty nostalgic for it. I mean, obviously Van Damme is considerably older nowadays, but if Mr. Jean-Claude is listening, dude, I've always loved your stuff. I always will, and Replicant, I think, is one of your best films. I mean, what's really kind of cool about Jean-Claude's approach to this film as well is he did something that was pretty similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Is that what Arnold did, especially early on in his career, is Arnold aligned himself with really talented directors, okay, who really knew what they were doing. Because I think Arnold kind of realized, okay, maybe I might be a little rough around the edges in terms of my acting, but if I align myself with a director, with someone who really knows what they're doing, then, you know, that'll bring the best out of me. And I think to an extent, that's what Jean-Claude decided to do in at about the midpoint in his career up to this point. Is he decided, you know what, I'm gonna go over to Hong Kong, and I'm gonna bring these Hong Kong directors over because they know action and they can shoot it well, and maybe they can make me look good in the process. So he brought over John Woo, okay, when he did Hard Target. Then he did Ringo Lam for Maximum Risk. He did Choi Hark for Double Team. He reteamed with Ringo Lam for this one, obviously. And then he did another film with Ringo Lam shortly after this one called In Hell, which is another acting tour de force from Jean-Claude.
Yeah, it is kind of amazing. Like, what he's, you know, like, with a lot of these action guys, they always talk about wanting to be better actors. It is amazing that Van Damme actually did it. Like, that he you know, studied the craft and actually became that better actor.
Yeah. I mean, like you said, it really is amazing. And then, of course, he also has a few paycheck roles in between, you know.
Exactly.
Again, we all have bills to pay, Matt. You know
Exactly.
what I mean?
Yeah, and I could never fault him for that.
But yeah, I mean, in the end, looking at this particular film, I think it's, I mean, man, like, would I put it in Jean-Claude's top 10? Probably not, because again, I think with any of these action guys, that their top 10 is probably going to be everything that they did within their prime. This particular film, Replicant, it's maybe not so much Van Damme in his prime, but it's maybe just a hair below that. I mean, like you said, he was 41 years old at the time. You know what I mean? So it's not like he was decrepit and old at that time. I mean, but he maybe wasn't as youthful as he once was. But what's really kind of cool about it is he's playing a character that's also aging with him, and he's trying something new again. And he could have certainly been like Seagal and went back to playing a special ops soldier or a cop or any of the things that we've seen Seagal play hundreds of times. But for him to say, okay, I'm going to play in this one film, Matt, I think that this is the best way we can kind of end this film. For this film, Jean-Claude decided, okay, in this one film, I'm going to play a serial killer and a baby that knows kung fu.
Yeah.
I mean, and he does it, and it works.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I think the Seagal comparison, I think, is the most apt one because, you know, the two of them kind of come up at the same time. They drop into DTV around the same time. And, excuse me, you know, Van Damme, he decides to go in one direction, whereas Seagal decides to go in another. You know, Seagal's like, just keep giving me as many of these roles where I am a former special ops guy who can never be beaten, right? Nobody can ever touch me. You know, I'm just going to do my slap chop thing and beat everybody up, and I can never be, you know, fooled, right? I can never, you know, it's kind of one of those things. I mean, around this time, in the early 2000s, he would get beaten every once in a while, or he would get fooled, but essentially that goes out the window. Whereas Van Damme says, okay, I want to do action movies, but I also want to do other stuff. I want to do movies like this, where I take chances and I be the bad guy. You know, I allow myself to get defeated, right? You know, I mean, Van Damme has to get defeated if he's going to be the baddie, and he goes for it.
He does. I mean, you said something too that we haven't really talked about, but that's. I mean, I don't think when Jean-Claude started his career and at the height of his powers when he was in his prime, I don't think he anticipated, nor did he really want to go into the direct-to-video realm, right? I don't think any of these actors really do. However, I think one of the great things about Van Damme going into the DTV route, okay, and doing these particular films, is he was taking chances and he was doing films that he would not have done had he been in that prime when he was signed with Universal and when he was signed with Columbia TriStar, right? I mean, because if you look at these direct-to-video films, he did this one, okay? He did, after this one, he did The Order, which The Order is not great, but The Order is kind of almost like a weird kind of slapstick comedy in some ways. You know what I mean? So, I mean, I can't knock it for that.
It's a fun one. It's definitely a fun one.
Yeah. He did, I'm trying to go down. He did The Hardcore, which kind of has like a hip-hop influence. I half wonder if maybe he was inspired by Seagal to do that one. But then he did a really wild one called Until Death.
Yes.
Where he plays a heroin addict.
Yeah.
Like he plays a drug-addicted cop.
Yeah.
Like, we wouldn't have seen the Muscles from Brussels do those kind of things when he was, doing Kickboxer and Hard Target. So I can't fault him for that.
No. And it is JCVD, where it's like he has that opening, like, one long take scene where he's like, hey, I'm almost 50 years old. I can't do these big, long one takes. Would you ever hear, Seagal say, I'm 50, whatever, I mean, I remember, like, in the period of time when I was doing my site, Seagal's birthday changed, right? He went from being born in 51 to 52. So, he's always been pushing that at that age thing. Whereas, Van Damme just says, yeah, I'm almost 50. I can't do these long scenes anymore like this. And he says it in a movie. It's one of the amazing, I mean, he still has those parts, right? He still has ones like, like we were talking about Pound of Flesh, where he's playing somebody who's younger. But even with that, even with Pound of Flesh, it's like he wants to show off that he still has it from a physical standpoint. I think he just wanted to kind of let everybody know that. But that, Enemies Closer was another good baddie role. I mean, he makes that movie Enemies Closer. Like I don't think that movie would have been as good. And of course, it's one of those movies where it has what I call the Destro effect, where I'm rooting for the bad guy. Because I really wanted to see Van Damme's baddie win in Enemies Closer. And I mean, yeah, Dolph plays baddies for sure. Seagal, I mean, other than Machete, right? He's not playing baddies. He only plays one role, and he only plays that one part.
Yeah. No, I mean, I forgot about Enemies Closer as well, but he plays like a wacky villain who's also a vegan.
Right.
Like, what?
Right. Yeah.
Like, we wouldn't get that.
Right. Well, it's like the thing is, it's like there's a scene in the beginning where he's in Maine. He like takes out a whole bunch of ICE agents, and it's like, I'm supposed to think he's the baddie when he's taking out the ICE agents, and they were kind of a jerk to him too. And it's like, then it had like I can't remember the actor's name, but he was like in like I can't even think of the movie name. The movie where him and Mark Paul Gosselaar, right? They're trying to get one of their roommates to kill themselves so they can get A's for the semester. But anyway, so a character that we is not supposed to be some kind of Navy SEAL Special Forces guy, versus Van Damme, who was just like chewing scenery like constantly throughout that film. He was just dressed up like a Mountie. It was just like a lot of fun. He's really leaned into that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, but no. I mean, Matt, this has been a ton of fun. I've enjoyed talking this particular film with you. It was a blast to go down memory lane and watch this particular film again. And just talking about it with you, it's always kind of validating when you get to speak with someone who has some of the same opinions and sentiments you do regarding a film that I don't think many would give the time of day to, especially 20. Well, now at this point, 23 years later.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, I would say the thing about this one is that when I first watched it, when I reviewed it for the site, I did get hung up on some of those like the psychic connection aspects and things like that. And I think there is maybe a part of me that as I've gotten older, I don't want to say I've gotten softer, but I think I appreciate different things in movies. And I think that the Van Damme performance was something that I appreciated more. The Ringo Lam direction is something I appreciated more. Rooker's performance, Catherine Dent's performance, those were things that I kind of appreciated more. And I left the kind of the psychic connection element and just said, okay, I'm just going to suspend belief. It's like if I'm able to, excuse me, to watch a movie where a guy puts on a metal suit and flies around and shoots things, or I'm okay with a guy from a planet called Krypton, and being, comes to Earth and he's indestructible and flies around. I think I can handle a movie where a clone has a psychic connection with its, and it's the person it's cloned from. And once I kind of set that part aside, then those performances and everything, and it all kind of worked a little bit more for sure.
Yeah. No. I was going to say something there, but I lost my train of thought.
Oh, sorry.
You did a wonderful job summing it up. So
no, that's all right. No worries. Yeah, I mean, anything else that we kind of missed on this, or anything that kind of stood out from you when we were watching this?
Well, actually, that's what I was just going to say. Actually, it came back to me. But I mean, what you said is exactly correct. I mean, this is a completely absurd concept. I mean, that's the thing that we really haven't talked about. But I mean, the whole idea of, okay, they're going to clone a serial killer in hopes of having a psychic connection to catch the other one.
Right.
Okay, that doesn't. I mean, you almost kind of wonder if maybe if they made it to where he had a long lost twin brother that could help, if maybe that might have worked. Maybe that might have worked better than them cloning. I mean, but again, I like to go back to the film Face Off. Okay, Face Off has an absolutely ridiculous and stupid premise. Okay, of pulling off faces and then applying liposuction and then hair implants and all this crazy stuff. I mean, but in the end, you want to know something? You go along with it and you buy it. Why? Because you have John Travolta and Nicolas Cage acting their asses off.
Yes.
And they are so invested in it that for those 2 hours, you buy it. Okay? For those 2 hours, you buy it. And that's with this film, okay? You have Michael Rooker and Jean-Claude Van Damme who are just so invested in this film that despite its completely ridiculous bug nuts premise, in the end, you do buy it. And you are able to go along with it for those 96 minutes.
Thinking about Nicolas Cage, I saw on Instagram, because I don't know how this happened on Instagram, but I get recommended, or I get like these suggested just sort of these like actor interviews where they talk about the craft. I think it's maybe because I've liked a few of them, but the Nicolas Cage one, he was talking about National Treasure, and he was talking about the scene where he's talking with his partner about stealing the Declaration of Independence. And he's like, you're reading the script and you're like, this is absolutely ridiculous, right? My character is about to say that he's going to steal the Declaration of Independence. It's ludicrous. But he's like, as an actor, you got to sell it. And an actor, you got to believe it, and you got to be serious, dead serious about it. And I think that's the thing about Nicolas Cage that makes his stuff work. But I think that's what makes this movie work too, is that Van Damme sells it, right? I mean, Van Damme plays the like you said, the toddler version of himself, the replicant version of himself, as much as he plays the killer version. And then Rooker, goes for it as well. Rooker plays the part as well. And it's like, if these actors, and if Ringo Lam as a director, if they don't buy the concept, there's no way we would have bought the concept.
Yeah, no. I mean, your film is only as good as its villain, and also, I mean, even larger than its villains, its actors.
Yeah.
And if they're not giving it their all, I mean, then what do you have? I mean, and that kind of goes full circle to what we talked about at the beginning. I think a lot of those Bruce Willis films, nobody is really invested in those films. I think everybody from the actors to the production crew, everyone is more interested in the paycheck at the end of the day than they are really putting together a quality product, and which is a shame. But in the end, Replicant. You picked a good one for me, Matt, because this is a fun one. So thank you.
No, I realize I haven't done a lot of Van Damme on this on the podcast. I mean, I did. Obviously, I talked about like the Kickboxer movies and the Expendable movies on my solo podcasts. So he came up there, and then I mean, I had Will from Exploding Helicopter on to talk about No Retreat, No Surrender. I want to say that might be the only other time I've really talked about, like, especially having a guest on. And so when we were talking about ideas for an episode, and you're like, hey, like to do Van Damme, and looking at what was available on Tubi and those different sites, Replicant came up, and I was like, I could go. It definitely seemed like it had a lot of material, at least for us to discuss. And it's one of those ones that revisiting it, I like it better. A great example was Welcome to Willits. I was watching for a previous podcast episode. And the second viewing, I was like, I actually don't like this as much as I did the first time. I love Dolph in it, but I started to kind of see cracks in it. And it's funny how with this one, it's the other way around. Whereas like the cracks in it, I left them aside, and I liked all the other pieces of it.
Yeah. No, well stated. This was, I like to look at this particular film, because again, Jean-Claude had Legionnaire and he had Desert Heat that went direct to video, but then he also had, around that kind of period, that time, he had films like Knockoff and Universal Soldier: The Return. Those went theatrical, and so, yeah, I guess I kind of had hope that he was still going to be a box office guy, if you will. And then when this particular film, again, that had all the makings and all the trappings to be a comeback film, okay, also with Ringo Lam directing, when it was decided, at least here in the States, we should say, I think it did get a theatrical release in other territories, but at least here in the States, when it was put on DVD and VHS, it was at that point, I think, considering the nature of your podcast, I think it was Replicant that really made it clear that, okay, Jean-Claude is going to be, he's now a video store guy. But, to be fair, you know what I mean? He came in at the right time for the direct-to-video market because he was still making, a lot of money during that time making these particular films, so...
Yeah, well, because it's interesting. I think for someone like a Dolph, right, that when Van Damme, Seagal start kind of going down into the DTV world, the parts that were available for Dolph were not quite as nice. And then you get people like Don the Dragon Wilson. He was pretty clear about he was supposed to do a movie called The Line, and his part was rewritten and given to Ray Liotta. And he was like, "That's it. I'm out of movies for a while." He took 5 or 6 years off from making movies because he was just so disillusioned with it. But that was what happened, right? Was that these big names, Ray Liotta doing direct-to-video stuff, right? It's like all these big names started going direct-to-video, but Van Damme and Seagal got in on it, early enough. And I think one difference between Seagal and Van Damme is that, and again, going back to that great interview you did with Benjamin Sachs, where he talked about, some of these things, where Seagal saturated the market with too much of his stuff and too much of the same stuff, right? Whereas Van Damme has a more varied DTV output, but also it's not as he didn't saturate the market with too much of his stuff, and I think that's when it sort of helped him a little bit along.
Yeah, definitely. He came in at the right time, but then again, conversely, it was also kind of sad that when guys like Van Damme and Seagal and Wesley Snipes were kind of muscling their way in, pun intended. Right. It was also pushing out the guys who had made their bread and butter for years. So yeah, the Gary Daniels, the Don the Dragon Wilson, the Brian Bosworth, the Michael Dudikoff. It was Michael Dudikoff, I think, was already pretty much on his way out by that point. But it was definitely, that had to be a blow to guys like Don the Dragon Wilson and Gary Daniels, to their ego, when they saw that guys like Van Damme and Seagal were starting to hit the DTV train. They that they knew, oh shit, my right. our time is up. Well, it was a good run while it lasted, right? But in the end, things come full circle. Look at what happened. It's pretty much ended for Seagal and Van Damme too. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point. It looks like Van Damme has a new one coming out next year called The Darkness of Man. Looks like it might be a Bondit Media kind of thing, directed by James Cullen Bresnik. But actually, it's got Cynthia Rothrock, who's another one of those ones who, kind of suffered when the bigger names went to DTV. But yeah, you look at Don the Dragon Wilson. It's like his career is really kind of smack dab in the 90s. And once, movies like this come out in the early 2000s, you see his parts start to dwindle and the type of parts start to dwindle to that, by the mid 2000s, he was just like, okay, that's it. And again, when that one situation, I think it's been documented on IMDb, or, that he said that's that when he lost that part to Ray Liotta, he just said, okay, I'm kind of done for a while, and he just took a break. And it's kind of too bad because, you know, he made some really great ones there with those Blood Fists that they were the kind of movies that, you know, like we talk about the video store era. It was like, you know, if all your friends had seen the new Van Damme movie in the theater and you were doing a movie night, Blood Fists were great because there were at least some people in the group who hadn't seen them before. And so it was like kind of the way I know for me how I got into Wilson was that, you know, everybody had seen the Van Damme movie, right? Because movies used to be in the theater for a lot longer too back then, right? So you could you know, you had the whole summer to see a Van Damme movie. And so it's interesting kind of how that, you know, once Van Damme started going direct to video, then, you know, there was less Wilson there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the cycle of life. I mean, we're all getting older, Matt.
Right,
you know what
yes.
I mean? Like, so you can't stay at the top forever, and all good things must pass. But yeah, it's been a ton of fun. Thank you again for the opportunity here.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as we're wrapping up here, Sean, anything you wanted to plug?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you want to listen to more of me drone on about these type of movies, you can check out my podcast, which is I Must Break This Podcast, which is the Dolph Lundgren fan podcast. I take a look at, me and a special guest take a look at all of the films of Mr. Dolph Lundgren, and we go in chronological order and analyze each of his films. And it's been a lot of fun. At this point, I think I have just a handful of episodes left now that we're basically caught up. But yeah, it's been a ton of fun. I recommend everyone checking it out. And real quick, since we have been talking about Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme, there is a book that is out that I encourage everybody to take a look at. Shameless self-promotion and plug here, but you can find it on Amazon. It is called Blood Spurt. Okay, not Blood Sport, but Blood Spurt with a U instead of an O. But it is a collection of essays all about the films of Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme. And yours truly, I did write a couple essays that are in the book. So you can take a look, you can check it out. But I did write an essay on his film Enemies Closer, as well as Blackwater. So please check that out.
Excellent. So it's called Blood Spurt. Is it all one word or is it two words?
All one word. And yeah, tons of fun essays in there, all about that kind of review and analyze all of the films of Mr. Jean-Claude Van Damme. But I was graciously asked to contribute a couple, and so I chose Blackwater and Enemies Closer and wrote those. And yeah, so those are in the books. You can check that one out. But it's a cool little coffee table read.
Yeah, definitely. I was going to look for. I'll put the link in the podcast description so people can find it.
Yeah.
So yeah, put the Amazon link in there. So yeah, and definitely going back to your podcast quickly. In addition to talking about the different Dolph movies, the interviews you do with people who are kind of behind the scenes, having making the movies and doing that part. I mean, obviously, I always talk about the Benjamin Sachs interview just because that just seems to come up a lot, especially with Seagal. It was so insightful there. But I know you talked to the director of War Pigs, and a lot of the kind of behind the scenes stuff that you get in those interviews is really fantastic. Like I think you'd asked him straight up, like, was Mickey Rourke supposed to be wearing a cowboy hat in his role in War Pigs? And he was like, no, we just kind of had to go with it. We're gonna have Mickey Rourke in the movie. So that kind of stuff, I think for people listening. It's another element of your podcast that I've always really enjoyed, and I think people listening, if you haven't, you definitely would check it out.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. And I do have you slated for joining me for one of the final episodes. So stay tuned. It will be coming within the year. I've had to slow down. Some life things happened, things of that nature, and so. The podcast is not as prolific as maybe it once was, but it still does about one episode a month or so whenever I can get around to it. But yeah, I really appreciate this. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, and thank you again for coming on. This was a great conversation, and yeah, definitely really enjoyed it. I think it kind of reminded me we need to get more Van Damme on the podcast. So it was great to actually be able to talk about his career.
Well, I love chatting the muscles from Brussels. So anytime you want you want to talk another one, you have a guest.
All right, excellent. That's I'm going to hold you to that for sure, because I think it'll be fun. We got plenty of other Van Damme out there to discuss. So yeah, absolutely. So yeah, thank you again, Sean, for coming on, and yeah, thank you everybody for listening. And yeah, we'll talk soon. Bye, everyone.
Direct